All right, so this is a regular meeting of the Norwich Planning Commission. And we will start off with, take a motion on the agenda, please.
I think Jeff said, I'll move the agenda. Jeff, you can so move it with, there you go.
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the agenda as presented? All right. All those in favor of approving the motion, the agenda as written? All in favor. Thank you. Any public comment on for items not on the agenda? Let me see. There's nobody in the room. I'm looking for hands. Okay. All right, let's keep going. Under correspondence, we had a letter from Jay Benson that was put in. It really applies to both the PC in a sort of historic record sort of way, and then very specifically to the solar siting subcommittee work. So it'll go in this packet, and then it'll go in the packet for the next solar siting meeting as well.
It was in the last packet, Jan. So we
Okay.
put it in, put it in the last packet. But I think Jay was not able to come, but I just think in terms of commenting on it, that I think that I hope everyone will read it and just reflect on it. I think there's some very important comments, not just about the decision, but the process. And I think it really does reflect the importance of the work that we're doing right now. And I think from the perspective of me, certainly, and others, just some failings that have happened, and at least wanting getting that on record as we move forward and try to make sure that we have a plan that it's really clear what we need to do in the future.
Mm-hmm. Jeff?
Yeah, I was the one dissenting planning commission member. I just want to put that on the record yet again.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, and I thought Jay's letter was thoughtful and balanced and useful. So I think we should bear it in mind as we go forward.
And I do hope people read it, and I really do, for everybody on the committee.
Yep. Well, I hope there's a standing expectation that everybody reads everything in the packet, but I'll leave that as a given. Okay, let's jump into the substance, the real bulk of the meeting here. And I wanted to just do a quick overview before we go down through some of the details. As we look at the block of work that we're doing for zoning regulation, update, modernization, changes, however you want to put it, we've got 5 or 6 at least topic items. The idea in my mind, at least, is to go through each topic, get it to where we've had the discussion on policy and what is our intent, what are we trying to do, and we have the rough language that we agree to, and we then say, okay, we got that one to a certain place, and we put it in the parking lot. And then we go to the next one and we get it to that state. And then we're going to end up with 5 or 6 in the rough drafted state. And then we wrap back around on that bundle, do a much more detailed edit and a review, and then feed it into the process that we'll talk about in the next agenda item. But right now, as I see the list, though, there's one topic, which is lot consolidation, which is kind of in that parking lot. We know what our intent was. We've got rough wording that makes sense. It's parked, waiting for the other ones to catch up and get there. The one that we talked about last time, which is ADUs and various topics, housing topics, duplex ADU, and so forth. We had the language in the packet for ADU specific things. Last packet had that language in it. So for that one, I would, I guess, open it up to confirm with the group that, at least for intent and rough language, the ADU changes can be put in the parking lot and wait for other topics to catch up. Or if we need to talk about that some more, we can. We didn't put it in the packet because it was in the last meeting's packet. So are there any comments specifically to the ADU changes that we talked about last time? Jeff?
Yeah. My main concern was the conflict between inventory equals affordability. I think that's a false narrative. So unless we can link what we're going to do with ADUs to affordability, I can't support anything that relates to changes.
So can we, and I heard this when we had the subcommittee meeting, and I wanted to, it's useful to address it here because my preference is to separate out the two to say, okay, what do we want to do and what do we think is right to do relative to ADU descriptions in our zoning regulations. And then as a separate important conversation, how do we support, increase, encourage affordability? So that's one thing that I'd like to do if we can. My second related question is really, what are the hooks to get leverage on affordability? I mean, we have been saying that one thing to do is increase a diverse inventory is good. It helps affordability. And the ADU is a piece of that. But if we wanted to get as maximum leverage to encourage affordability, what tools do we have? Stephen?
Yeah, I just want to reiterate that the bulk of these modernization pieces are to be in compliance with current state law, including the accessory dwelling unit modifications that can be found in Act 47. So it's really the intent to comply with and come into compliance with current law, and to the extent that any changes are made, they're all really just to comply with that current statute.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to the extent we're trying to sync definition of an ADU with the state law, I'm okay with that.
Is that, Stephen, go ahead, Mary.
No, I agree. I think if we have to do to get compliance with state law, I think that's right. But in terms of, I am completely aligned with Jeff that I don't think that we can conflate affordable housing with just increasing the stock of housing and the increasing of density and of traffic and everything else downtown as an affordable housing effort. So I think we can do the edits that need to be for the state law, fine. But anything else, I think we need to be clear that it's about increasing housing, not increasing affordable housing. And I would have some concerns about that.
So Stephen, it doesn't have to be now, but because we don't have the wording in the packet, but if you want to wrap back around with the wording, because I think, as I recall from last meeting's conversation, there were elements of changes that were not required by the state law, whether it was the square footage proportion,
Yeah, I mean,
things like that were not, we were adding a little to the minimum required. So can you delineate that so that
sure.
we know what's required?
Yep, and we can do that right now. The rules for accessory dwelling units are quite limited from in the state definition. They do have a sort of minimal threshold for size, which we are, I guess we're less restrictive than the statute in the sense that we will provide for an accessory dwelling that is 50% of the floor area of the principal dwelling, or 2,000 square feet, where the sort of state minimum is 30% and 900 square feet.
So when you
So-
say we provide that, you're talking about the proposed language.
Correct.
So just to be clear, an accessory dwelling unit could be 2,000 square feet.
In the
That is
proposed,
on the table.
Wow, that's big.
so I asked this before, but just to be clear, we have, you have a duplex. You can put a duplex, which is essentially a connected structure that
Yeah.
could be 3,000 square foot units right next to each other, you know, with a common wall, and that would be 2 large units on a lot, right? Jeff?
That's correct. And, you know, that's also something that we're updating in our, you know, in the bylaws. It's actually very simple, you know, extension in the sense that now any duplex has to be, you know, treated in the same fashion as that you would treat a single family home. So, you know, the state is now viewing a duplex at, you know, sort of same degree of impact as a single family home. Therefore, you know, it has to be, you know, a duplex has to be permitted wherever a single family home is permitted, which is the same for accessory dwelling units. So essentially, duplex or an accessory dwelling unit has to be sort of treated in our bylaws the same way we would treat a single family home in terms of, you know, district standards, dimensional standards, by right use. So in other words, it doesn't have to go through a conditional use review in front of the DRB in most instances. So though, you know, those two concepts are, you know, sort of paired together. And the addition of, you know, duplexing in our bylaws is part of this update process. It's just not something I've yet brought forward to you in a sort of amended fashion, because it's basically just adding the phrase "and duplexing" wherever single family homes appears in the bylaws right now. So we can sort of get to that at the final stage.
Okay. Jeff? Sorry, Stephen, just a sec. Jeff?
Yeah, and I think my only concern is that my understanding of the law is that if we add a unit, it requires approval by the DRB, whether it's a duplex as a PRD or otherwise. So I'm not opposed to the notion of how we engage duplexes, but the rules require review for more than one unit on a lot.
At subdivision, yes.
Well, what I'm saying is, I don't think you can add another unit. There's a conflict between ADU and you know, a duplex. A duplex, to me, by law, requires DRB review.
No longer. In any circumstance where we would consider review for a single family home, we have to treat a duplex as, you know, essentially a synonymous use. And if a single family home is a by right use on a lot that's been lawfully developed, then so is a duplex.
So if I'm changing something though, so if I have a single family home, and the simplest thing would, I'm gonna divide it into 2 and make it a duplex, that's one thing. But say I do that and I double the size of both of them, but but I changed it. I took 1 unit and turned it into 2, spent a lot of money to do it. Do I need a permit? Do I need other than a building permit?
Yeah. My issue is that the permitted use doesn't mean you don't get DRB review for the additional use. I mean,
typically, family homes are a by right use in most districts. in other words, a permit that the zoning administrator can issue,
Mhm.
Well, at
unless
this
it's
juncture,
specifically prohibited.
Let me just pull Mary in because she's had her hand up. I want to keep everybody involved. Mary?
My comment is that, when I went through the materials this morning, and it said confirm edits, I was looking for where the edits were. And it seems like it might be helpful if we're going to discuss something that we have an updated one. Because I had a printed pack and wasn't able to get online to go seek out the earlier version, and wasn't sure if there had been additional edits made to whatever version was there. So I'm not sure that at least right now, I'm not sure that we can confirm edits right now without having a document where we can see what we're confirming.
Mary, you do have the document.
The ADU one was in the last meeting's packet, if we're talking about that one.
Right. I know it was in the last meetings, but it's not in this meeting's packet. So I can.
Right.
So anyways, I just, look at, people may have for me, I look at it online, I printed it up. So, but I think also if we're going to do it, if it's on this agenda, it would be helpful to have the material in this agenda from my perspective.
Yeah, I wasn't planning to dive into it this deep, but I think if we can ask Stephen to pull it together, and I do think as we're going forward here, having the basically turning on track changes in a Word doc and having the original with the changes co-located is always helpful to see where.
Just to that point, I'm a little reluctant to edit a master document at this point containing all of the edits in all of the sections. I would prefer to do it on a topic basis. I am happy to include in that, extraction, the original language, which I've done with the parking.
Yeah.
So I'm doing my best to make sure, to clarify what is, existing and what is proposed. And I'd like to continue in the fashion that I've been doing that.
No, I agree. That's the way to do it, is to pluck them. Just like we're saying, we've got 5 or 6 topics and we're trying to move them in, individually across the line, fine. And if we just have an individual topic with original and proposed, and I think to the point about ADUs, then when we have proposed, if we color code or notate it in some way that says required by state, required to be, current with state regs as a qualifier on the proposed, then we have kind of the whole set in one bundle.
Yeah.
We do that for each topic.
Yeah.
That would be really helpful.
Absolutely happy to do that. Will do that.
Okay.
All of these items appear in other parts of the document as well, right? Wherever accessory dwelling units come up, we're going to have to attend to that. But in the main section 4.10 or whatever it is.
Yep. 1.4. Yeah, 4.14 is what we're changing. But yeah, so that's a good overall plan.
Okay.
Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with that comment, but when that's done, because as we get into this with respect to parking and whatnot, it'd be nice to clip the pages, not the whole document, to see the text changes, so I don't have to scroll back and forth. I agree with what Steve said, but just grab those pages so I can see the edit, so I don't have to chase it.
Yeah, I'll annotate these documents to, so it's, becomes obvious where I'm referring to.
And if we could, just before we move off of ADUs and duplexes, if we could kind of give Stephen any questions we have to be the best prepared for the next meeting. So one of my questions is, how is a duplex different than an ADU? I understand that there's a sort of physical shared wall, and an ADU is subordinate to the primary. But to the question we were just bouncing around about a duplex to a single family, if I was going to on a single lot, I'm going to do a building project. I'm going to make my single family home bigger, and I get a building permit. Boom, that's all I need. So if I was going to do the exact same thing, spend the same amount of money, but I was going to make 2 units out of that, I'm going to turn it into a duplex.
The
How does
short
it
answer there is,
relate to the permitting of what I need to do and how it's defined?
under current state law, there is no difference. In terms of municipal permitting, if a single family home is a by right use or a permissible use in that district, a duplex cannot be treated differently.
Even a new duplex that's created by a new project.
Even a new you can tear down your house and build a duplex. And I, as a zoning administrator or any zoning administrator in the state of Vermont, would have to review that as we would a single family home.
Okay. Jeff and then Mary?
Yeah, what Steve's saying may be true. I'm not clear on that. At this juncture, to the extent you're changing density on the home or the parcel, doesn't matter whether it's a commercial lot or residential lot, regardless of whether it's a permitted use, it requires review. And so I just want to be clear legally that increasing density, which has historically required approval to increase density, is something that we're clear about before we make any changes.
So I would ask for that specific question. So Stephen, you're saying something, Jeff is wondering whether that's the case. If you can find the
I'll circle
exact
back to Jeff.
statute, get the regional commission to chime in somehow, clarify that. Because I think that is the question. Can somebody create, so if we had 5 houses in downtown and then a year from now, those were 5 duplexes, could that happen with no permitting other than building permits? That would be a good thing to know.
In the town of Norwich.
In the town of Norwich.
Yeah, I am so happy to answer that question.
Okay. Mary?
So staying first on the duplex theme, if someone has a duplex then, and according to Steve, it is viewed as a single family home or treated as a single family home, could someone have a duplex and an ADU on the same property? Is that what we would, is that
The
possible?
proposed, tell me if I'm wrong, Stephen, but I know the proposed wording says you could have 3 units on a lot if one of them's an ADU. Did I read that right?
Yes. Yes, you could have you could construct a duplex with an ADU.
And that would be on what size lot, Stephen?
A single lot. But yeah, how does that work to acreage?
I don't consider land development when reviewing by right building permits. So if the lot was lawfully created, conforming or non-conforming, the lot size isn't relevant to the process of permitting a building. It is very much when land is being developed. In other words, when the planning commissioner, the DRB creates a lot, lot size minimums are in play, density calculations are in play. Post that, once it's been developed, that's not subject to my review or a zoning administrator's review.
Okay.
Mary,
I think
does that
that's a
answer your
question for us to, I think that's interesting. So as an example, I live on a 2-acre, somewhere around 2-acre lot. I have a house that's under 2,000 square feet. So I could add a duplex of some significant size to my lot and have 3 units and call my house an ADU.
No, not, you do have to pass the, subordinate to the primary dwelling. You as the owner, would have a hard time convincing me that, you weren't trying to exploit some loophole.
Well, I'm trying to just do what is permitted by the town if I have a, so anyways, that's still a question. That's an outstanding question.
Yeah.
The second question is, if the state is stating that an ADU is 900 square feet, why would the town of Norwich want to have a minimum or a permissible, if I'm understanding it, size of an ADU that's 120% larger with 2,000 square feet, which for many people is quite a nice size home. Not for everybody, but for many people is a nice size home. That's a huge, that's a big house. That's that's not a big house, but that's not a tiny house.
Yeah,
I mean, I'd be happy to.
Several of the changes proposed for ADUs come under the intent of making them more, encouraging them to be bigger. The thing about ownership, saying that the owner doesn't have to live in the main house. So the tenor of the conversation in the last meeting was, how do we help ADUs give us housing, give us more useful housing? That was part of the intent on the table. So obviously you got to start by confirming the intent and then let that roll into the wording.
Yeah, it started, as I recall it, this started with the intent as to how to think about increasing affordable housing. And we have gotten, I think, strayed significantly from that if we are creating 2,000 square foot homes in Norwich.
I think the intent is to comply with current state law.
Well, the current state law would be 900 square feet for that. That would comply, right?
Sure, and that number is a proposal.
So that'll. I mean, we can park this in that. So Stephen will put out that document again, and it will say proposed wording is 2,050%, and then it'll say state requires 930%, and then we'll look at that in a comprehensive way. Clearly, there are topics for discussion. Jeff?
Yeah, so my issue broadly is that we have zoning requirements. We have townwide zoning that essentially says minimum lot size, 1 acre in village residential. And because our current zoning ordinance allows a duplex, in theory, that's half-acre lot sizing. So we need to understand, particularly since our subdivision regs change the baseline lot size requirements from Tracy Hall by distance, we need to understand what that means. So sitting here today, our current underlying zoning ordinance says a 1 acre lot could accommodate 2 dwelling units with review. So what are the implications across the entire town with respect to how we comport with the law? I'm not going to say what the law is.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we've given Stephen some homework in terms of putting back in the packet a more detailed description on the duplex and housing and ADU front. I guess I'd like to ask the group, before we move off this topic, how do we want to talk about the affordability piece? And we had the conversation about a diverse housing stock is sort of the first baby step towards better, more affordable options. And then we have a definition of affordability that can go to whether you get grants or bump density if you meet certain criteria, which you need to have a multi-unit development before it starts to make sense. So how do we talk through affordability versus inventory and get somewhere on that? Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, I think for me, I don't really care how big the ADU is on one hand. On the other hand, the notion of rental for a 2,000 square foot building in Norwich at 3,500 bucks a month. That's not what we're striving for. So to me, I don't want to change, I don't want to exceed what the state requirement is unless there's some incentive from an affordability standpoint. Because to me, the ADU thing does not equate to affordability in any way unless we require it.
So what do we have for tools that go right at affordability and not just inventory or diverse inventory? What do we have? Jeff Lubell? Just a second.
Yeah. If I get my video on, yeah, thanks for recognizing me. We've talked a lot about this in the Affordable Housing Subcommittee, and I think we think that really the right approach is a multifaceted approach, and it's not like there's one thing that you're going to do, right? So part of it is really thinking about how can you increase density to allow more housing units to be developed in the same body of land, and that is going to allow you to develop at a lower cost. Part of it's allowing, so you might, that's the big density question is a long-term question, right? Like what's the right density in different districts? That might take some time. But one really easy thing you could do would be to, increase the density bonus in the plan unit development, right? You could like double it, for example, and allow them to have more density if they provide affordable housing. And you just have to change that in one place. So that's one idea. But at the same time, I think we would encourage you to think about allowing a more diverse range of housing types. So allowing duplexes and triplexes and garden style apartments and townhomes, and those tend to rent and sell at lower prices. And then beyond all of those things, to the extent that we can work with affordable housing developers to build housing under Vermont programs or federal programs, or to work with mission driven developers that are going to build lower cost housing without subsidies. All those things are things we can do, but it's not like there's only one thing. That would be my suggestion, would be to have a multifaceted approach. And yeah, sure, we should have ADUs, we should have duplexes, we should have townhomes, we should have, a whole range of different things. So that would be my suggestion. And we should, if someone wants to come and build affordable housing, we should try to make it easy for them and not make it hard, and figure out ways to kind of accommodate their needs.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. So I'm still curious. I mean, I don't disagree with what Jeff's saying. It sounds like the strong levers to, require at least some percentage to be truly affordable by the definition of affordability apply to quite a limited piece of housing stock. If you have a 10-unit new development, if you're doing something with a lot of units, which is going to be a small percentage of our housing stock. So that's my concern if we say we only want to have housing if it's affordable, more housing if it's affordable. I'm not hearing levers. I'm not hearing ways of doing that other than diverse housing stuff. It's somewhat a tide lifts all boats sort of thing. Jeff Goodrich? Muted.
I agree with the notion of diverse housing types, but that's not what this agenda item is. So right now, I don't have a problem with bonuses. I don't have a problem with, the different housing stock, et cetera, ideally without subsidies. So it's truly affordable. The question for ADUs is, if we're going to grant something greater than the state, size of an ADU, then to me, we can say we're glad to do that so long as it's affordable.
Okay, Christian, and then is that Bob?
Yeah,
Christian?
so I just want to try to make sure I'm understanding. So are we all, is everyone in the room under agreement, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we have to go to the 900? If that's the state, like there's no objections to conforming with state law. And so the question is, to go above and beyond that would be a choice. And we could set the line at 1,300, 1,500, 2,000, no limit, whatever. And this is Jeff, Mary, concerns, like, I'm just curious, to Jan's point, how do you, like, if you're going to say, put some sort of, like, tie a new higher limit to affordability, do you have any metrics, any examples, any way we could do that, or that it's been done? Like, are we gonna, is the town gonna measure that? Deem what's affordable on an annual basis and set rents? Is that, like, I'm just curious how that would work in practice.
Is that, I see a hand, is that Bob or is that Stephen?
It was me, but I'm lowering my hand.
Okay, yeah, I think mechanisms is probably the best word. That's my question to the group and to the again, precedent, what other towns are doing, all that stuff. What are the mechanisms we have at our disposal? Jeff?
Yeah, this is brand new. So to the extent other towns are doing it, it's brand new. So the point right now is Jeff Lubell is an expert, in my opinion, with respect to what the affordable, context is. That is something that can be woven into. If you want to go above what the state requirement is, this is what you need to consider.
The only thing,
I don't
yeah,
know.
Just a second, Mary?
yeah, so I don't, so Christian, I don't have an answer to your question. It's not my area of expertise in terms of how do you make it affordable, but I think that I think that's a goal if we're going to do it. I'm not in favor of just expanding, letting everybody double the number of units on their property. But I also think that if you do think that, one of the things I've mentioned once before for ADUs is that in another town I'm familiar with, is that if you have an ADU, it must be rented to somebody for 12 months of the year. It's not something that it's not going to be Airbnb cash flow kind of situation. And so I think that is one way that I have seen some towns looking to provide housing for teachers, for nurses, for other people do it. So make that a requirement of getting the permit to build it. Now, I think the other thing is, look at, you make it broader. Maybe people are going to build it for their parents, but again, 12 months of the year, they're going to be living there, but it's not going to be something you're going to flip and have it as a revenue stream.
Yeah, and so I would put that on the list of mechanisms, which is some short-term rental policy as it relates to our housing stock. That is a perfectly legitimate thing to talk through. Stephen or Bob?
Yeah, I think the municipalities that Mary's talking about are achieving that through some kind of short-term rental registry, which is an ordinance. I think that's a great idea to explore. The real thrust of the accessory dwelling units and the duplexing is, to prevent, the sort of legal jeopardy of somebody coming in, applying for an accessory dwelling unit, and us having a process whereby we have to do conditional review and having that decision appealed. The town's in some jeopardy there. We're in the sense that we're not complying with state law. That's essentially the outcome that we have to avoid, and we can avoid by updating our bylaws to comply with the sort of current state process. In terms of the sort of threshold for size, I've seen other towns. I think it's generally understood that you can be less restrictive than state statute. other towns have different values. I think 2,000 square feet is generous. I think, but I don't think we have to comply with the threshold set by the state. We can't do less than that, but I believe we can do more.
Right. Christian?
I'm happy to let Jeff go first if he's ready.
Sure, Jeff.
Yeah, we had a legislator meeting with the corporate council late summer. Allison Clarkson was lamenting what Woodstock has faced with respect to the small units and the costs. Land values, home values, rental values. There are no properties in New Hampshire and Vermont that are higher than Hanover and Norwich, Woodstock, and I can pick a couple towns around Burlington. In my personal arena, everybody in the nation who has any money is moving here. So to me, if you want to bring your parents in, you want to bring family members in, there's no rental component of that, and that's easy enough to say, yep, we can figure that out. So I just want to be clear that the land values are so high here that we need to be very careful about exceeding state standards unless there's a lever, there's something that manages how that gets done. And I thank Mary for the Airbnb comment because it's a good one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, Christian.
I wonder if this group, in the interest of moving forward, is there a number? So is there a number between 900 and 2,000 that gains more consensus? Like, I'll be honest, 2,000 seems like pretty unnecessarily large for an ADU. Like, and I'm pro increasing diversity of housing stock. It seems pretty large. It's more than most affordable housing metrics would show that it's required for a family of 4. So is there a number here that draws any sort of reasonable consensus, like anything beyond the 900? Is there one benefit of going beyond the 900 is I think we would then be allowed to put caveats around like Airbnb. My read, and I could be wrong, is that we can't limit Airbnbs if we were to strictly go with the 900, because is that right?
I don't know. So it would be to separate out our variables, Stephen. It would be useful to know the give us a little background. It can be for the next time. Let's put it on the agenda. The short-term rental. What are our options? Because if you say it's an ordinance rather than so would a short-term rental ordinance be a select board matter, not a planning commission matter? What are the planning commission matters that relate to that? Just what are other towns doing? I think we're, at least I certainly am flying blind on this one.
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. In fact, there was a recent Supreme Court decision that essentially said that municipalities can regulate short-term rentals municipally. So I'd be happy to do some background on that and provide that to the group.
Stephen, can you just can we just be sure that if you limit short-term rentals, we're allowed to single out a specific type of unit, such as an ADU, or is that a townwide ordinance on short-term rentals?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that, but I will review with that in mind.
Yeah, if you can just make us a backgrounder on short-term rental options and precedents and so forth, that would be very helpful. And then that's a topic for the agenda. Okay, so I think because we've got some other, I'm trying to get some progress on several of these with each meeting. So let's we've got enough homework for Stephen on this one. Let's move to the next one. And then we can wrap back around as we get the information we need. Jeff, you something on this before we go to the next one?
No, just Jan, just as something we've discussed. So a question I've posed to Jan relates to folks who attend our meetings, how they identify themselves, how they show their interests. And, you know, I do a bunch of these meetings, and, you know, when you go to the select board, you say, you know, my name, my address, etc. Otherwise, you say my name, where I am, my interest in this topic, etc. In most of the communities I tend to present projects, there's a sign-in sheet. You give your name, you give your email, you give your address, etc. What your interest is. And so I've been concerned since last summer that that we need to tighten up. Who, although I know Jeff Lubell, hypothetically, hi, I'm Jeff Lubell, Norwich Affordable Housing Subcommittee, et cetera. So I just want to encourage us going forward that to the extent there are folks in this screen that I don't know, to the extent there's an interest with someone going to speak, I think it's important in terms of the law, frankly, that whoever speaks says, here's who I am, here's where I live, here's my interest, et cetera.
Jeff, just for the records, our minutes do capture all attendees by name.
Yeah, hey, Steve, I understand, but I can go back and point out a whole bunch of folks, including on this screen, who I don't know. I don't know where they live. I don't know what their real interest is. So sitting here, I mean, I assume that, I know who Amy Stringer is, but, if she's going to speak, that's all I'm saying.
So just a point of order from my point of view, there's a significant difference between a member of the public who wants to sign on and watch this happening. I mean, anybody who wants to can watch the video tomorrow, invisibly if they want to. So I think that's a totally legitimate way to participate. We've spoken before, and I will try to continue the discipline, the bare minimum that the select board does. Someone who speaks gives their name and their locatable address. That I would support. It starts to cross my line personally to ask for interest or affiliation or something for someone who's speaking, unless it's some official, you are the chairman of the land trust or something like that. But that last part is just my personal opinion. Mary?
My experience at the select board is that they stop the tell me what road you live on. And I guess I would just really prefer if we, kind of as an amendment, a friendly amendment to Jeff's, is that people say, I'm Mary Gorman, I'm a resident of Norwich. Or if I'm not a resident of Norwich, and this is why I'm here. I think that there's a lot of, there gets to be a lot of assumptions made about where people live. I think there are safety issues as people speak up publicly. And I guess I would want to make sure that people can feel safe and not judged by their address. So that would be, I agree that it would be nice if people, and I think people usually do say that, but maybe that would be an amendment.
I'm fine with that. Is there any concern? I think the bare minimum would be name, which is required to sign in anyway, and resident status of Norwich, and then we'll take that as the starting point. Jeff?
Yeah, and I'm simply saying, if I go to a meeting in Hartford or Hanover or Lebanon, I have to sign a sheet that says, here's my name, here's my email, here's my address, here's my connection. And I can go beyond that. Virtually every single community I go to present projects, that's the baseline, so that, to the extent someone in this email expresses a concern, then we have the opportunity to reach out to that person.
Yeah, if we had people here, I would have them sign the sign-in sheet. Absolutely. Matter of course, every public meeting in Vermont does that.
Yeah, hey, that didn't happen this summer
as well.
With any discussion about some things on Route 5. We had a bunch of folks in attendance publicly. There was no sign-in roster. There was no contact info. I still don't know who the folks were that attended those meetings.
Not on my watch.
Yeah, so let me just hold it for a second. And I don't yeah, I'd like to put this on, frame it a little bit, and then we can put it on the agenda for the next meeting, because I think I understand the convention, and I've certainly seen it, where on an in-person meeting you pass the sheet around and you sign in. So if we're going to do that, then we need the Zoom equivalent that's implementable. And so we need to look and say, okay, I can see name, first and second name, first and last name, great. Do I need to know who's a Norwich resident on these participants? What we just need a consistent remote, or basically the hybrid version of the sign-in sheet that this group wants to practice. And so I would put that as something to think about, and we'll put that process topic on the agenda for an upcoming meeting. Okay. All right. Thank you. Next on this list of fascinating zoning regulations is parking. So Stephen, if you could, at a high level,
Yep.
summarize the changes, and then I think again, we're going to ask the same things again, most likely, which is, and you did it with parking. Here's the existing. Here's the proposed. So if you could just summarize quickly what we're changing and why.
Sure. The changes are stem from current legislation, Act 47 and Act 181. The comment should be visible in the document, pointing out where a change is mandated by a certain act. So it changes the dimensions of parking spaces, ADA accessibility, gives some determination or extra determination on how we can modify our parking requirements. Essentially, the changes stem entirely from changes to state legislation.
Okay. Any thoughts or comments on the proposed parking changes? Jeff?
Yeah, Jan, thank you for asking me to submit some written comments. I have a bunch of comments, but I don't know that I need to go through them tonight. I appreciate what's being proposed. My comments generally say, let's create a paradigm in which the DRB can engage applicants and make judgment calls. Although my comments go way beyond that, that's basically what they say. I don't know if I should go any further.
I would appreciate if you went further. I think currently there is scope for DRB to waive or modify the requirements. So if you could expand, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah. So Steve, I think I'm going to keep it simple. I like what I think is happening, and Jan can send my MS Word document to the Planning Commission, and you can go forward. I can spend a whole bunch of time here, but it's like a dwelling. I've got more than a page, but at least one per unit. It does make sense to me, but it could be framed in terms of a driveway length, that sort of thing, or you have a garage, that sort of thing. So I don't want to be draconian and say you got to have a space for one. The lodging or the dwelling, it's confusing, including an ADU, similar issues, because it fits both. How do you accommodate that? Office uses, I could talk about whether municipalities do. Not sure I really care, but whether it's site plan or conditional use review, I mean, I think the DRB ought to have flexibility to say, hey, look, we'll look at the specific proposal at hand, and if we think there should be greater parking, but you don't want to provide it, you can demonstrate you can provide the space, and maybe it's a condition of approval that to the extent it's needed in the future, then you build it. For now, we're okay. I'm going to go through retail and say the same. I see retail much higher rates in historic ordinances, but I like where you're headed. Retail folks are even higher than that, but same thing. Let the staff and DRB take a look and go there from there. Industrial to me should be divided into two categories, including warehouse and if there's more than warehouse, like industrial, office space, that sort of thing, people using the facility. So I don't have a problem with 1 per 1,000 with a warehouse hypothetically, but if it's got office space, how many employees, what are the customers? Again, I would like to give the DRB with staff input the discretion to say this is what we think, yada yada yada. Restaurant, bar, civic, etc. All on the same front. The non-residential, I don't have a problem with that. As far as the parking space size, 9 by 18 is basically the generic size that I'm seeing, with the exception of possibly 9 by 16, where you've got bumper overhang on sidewalks, that sort of thing. So I would give that sort of flexibility. Plus, you've got the short vehicles, the compact vehicles. ADA parking. I agree with the notion of 8 and 5 for 13. If it's 2 ADA sharing the aisle, it's 8, 5, 8. But I think I want to be clear: the aisle access is not the same as ADA access to the building, which the DRB could discuss, which is not in my comments. That's a separate issue. Setback questions. To me, it depends on the use. If you got two commercial properties abutting one another, if it makes sense to even overlap the boundary with parking, I don't really care about that. I think it matters if you've got something like residential in the backyard. I like the 5-foot, query, but if it's residential and you've got a rear setback or side setback of 8 feet, we need to think about, what the use is next door. Off-street loading. The only issue I had there was we've got a lot of folks in town that work at a home. UPS trucks, FedEx trucks, they park in the street. I'm okay with that. I don't think we need to regulate, off-street parking. So I want to throw that out there. Let's see. I'm going to skip over that comment. I'm close enough.
Yeah, so I hear you, and Stephen can take those in, and we'll forward your sheet, anything you want to add to it, and put it in the packet. But my question then is the more general one about DRB flexibility and the implementation of and actually just to jump all the way ahead to the fourth bullet, that is conditional use review. There's an added blurb that gives the DRB a great deal of flexibility in a general sense, but that whole topic of DRB as these are the people that are sitting down and looking at the specifics. How much discretion do we give them? How much guidance do we give them? And just to put out Ernie's comment when I asked him to look at this when he couldn't be here, and he looked through the things, and his comment was essentially, if you give the DRB flexibility and authority to make these calls, please give them detailed guidance of criteria and so forth to use to make the call. Otherwise, it's vague and difficult, and the DRB has a hard time. So I think it's an important topic in general, DRB flexibility. Jeff?
Yeah, the times are changing. Parking requirements are changing. I'm personally inclined to say, to the extent staff vets an application and presents a case to the DRB for a specific use, I'd like to optimize the flexibility of the DRB. I don't want to say you got to do, you know, this many spaces, the DRB may reduce it to 50%. I'd rather say, this is what our ordinance says, the DRB has the flexibility after staff taking a look and so forth. And there are other towns locally who say, look, if you're not going to provide the parking, show me how you can provide the parking if it's needed going forward. That could be part of it. But at this juncture, if staff says, I don't think it's needed, DRB approves it conditionally, and then the use changes down the road, they got to come back and get an amendment anyway. So I'd like to optimize or maximize the DRB's flexibility in that regard.
And I think I agree with that. And I think the text right now as written provides a lot of opportunity for flexibility. You know, item B, development, the DRB may require they can require more parking if necessary. They can authorize less parking if necessary. My take is, parking generally sorts itself out. And to the extent that we can sort of deregulate our bylaws in terms of parking, all the better. I would like to workshop your comments into the text. I think everything I heard you say, sounds valuable. Out of all of the pieces that I put together, I think, this is the least cooked. And so the feedback is valuable, and I'll look forward to incorporating it into the next version for our next meeting.
Okay. Good. Thank you. So let's.
I just reiterate that.
Yep.
Sorry, there we go.
Go ahead.
The owl was asleep. I just reiterate from some conversations with people in DRB, especially with the kind of rotating cast there, as with any body in town, any guiding principles baked into it certainly seem to be appreciated by them, to understand how to prioritize things that fall to them to decide. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, and we'll get to it again in a couple bullet items. Okay, so that's parking. Let's parking and move to the next one, which is several agricultural related proposals. You want to give us a little background on this one, Stephen?
Sure. These additions, sorry, I'm just looking for my notes here. Yeah, so accessory on-farm businesses are provided for by Act 143, state legislation, essentially authorizing and limiting municipal land use regulation of an accessory on-farm business. We do not have a definition for accessory on-farm businesses in our current bylaws, though we do have a number of them in town. So this is an effort to sort of encapsulate that use, bring the bylaws into into compliance with state legislation that the act was passed in 2018. And this topic really just sort of addresses agricultural use at large in the town. So it provides for a definition and use for an open air market. It provides a definition for accessory on-farm businesses and for agricultural sort of roadside stands.
So as an overview, just correct me if I'm wrong if I state this. So we're defining 3 different agricultural related uses. One of which at least, you're saying accessory, the on-farm business has state regulation, has state-related statutes that tell us what we can and can't do. And so question one would be, for that one, does our definition match the state's definition? If not, why not? But so get that line. That's the one that's lined up. And so we want to have the definitions lined up. And then I guess my second question is, for the other two, open air market and roadside stands, are there any state constraints?
No. No, I mean, municipalities have the ability to create the bylaws that they want, defining the uses that they want. So we do have the authority to establish these uses and regulate them accordingly. These definitions for roadside agricultural stands and for open air markets I've sort of collected from and aggregated by reviewing other municipalities in the region and across the state. So who else has defined an open air market in in their bylaws? If so, what was it? Does it apply for our context?
Okay.
And
just to frame it a little farther, then we have definitions of each, and then we have permitted you what districts they're allowed in and so forth. So they're kind of, those are separate layers. We could all agree, yep, that's a great definition for an open air market, and then we need a separate conversation about where we want to put them or allow them.
Yes, and to that point, open air, I define that use as a conditional use in all districts. And for the same for a roadside agricultural stand, actually taking that a bit further and saying that they, if they comply with the criteria as written, they are exempt from permitting. So you do not need to go to the zoning board or the zoning administrator to get a permit to sell lemonade at the end of your driveway.
Okay, Mary, you have your hand up?
Mary, you're muted.
Sorry, I said this is really great work. So here's a question, because I'm a huge fan, of course, I think as many of us are, of farm stands. I would say, though, that the definition that you have identified for for what is a farm business, and you identify Hogwash, Norwich Farm Creamery, Honeyfield, and Sweetland as examples. Sweetland doesn't fall into that. I mean, it really, if you go to Sweetland Farms, because what I'm reading here is that is for the sale of products, provided the qualifying products are produced on the farm, or they're some sort of products that have the name and describe the farm on it. So the store that now has evolved, and it has evolved down on Sweetland Farms, you can buy fish from Alaska, you can buy chocolates from all over the state, you can buy. Let me just finish, please. There's lots of stuff. I mean, in some ways, it's part way between a farm store and a convenience store, and so I guess I just I'm conscious of that. I'm also cognizant that they've created a biomass plant there across the street as well. So there are places where that particular property is maybe that's perfectly acceptable, but we got something's gone a little amiss there, and it would not be permitted under the way this is currently defined.
David?
Yes, if just to address that, I mean, there is sort of some criteria to to be to have an accessory on-farm business. One, you have to be a registered farm. And subsequent to 2018, there's been some expansion of what are qualifying products, which include other people's products. So I'd be happy to share, with the group, the sort of background information that, led to this. But I would say that Sweetlands Farms absolutely is an accessory on-farm business, as defined by the state.
Okay, so I think that it goes along with the common theme
Yeah.
we've been talking about here, which is please delineate where what the state says we have to do as tightly as
Yep.
possible, so that we can. I just don't want to waste our time talking about something we don't have the power to change.
Right.
And to your point, I don't want somebody suing us and us losing because we didn't understand state regs. So yes, definitely help us out with. Here are some examples. I mean, I had the one you didn't list it, but there's essentially the permanent farm stand on Route 5 South that was Killdeer, and now it's different. But that also it sells things from other farms. It's a
And it's also not a farm.
and it's
That's
not
not,
a
that's
farm.
not, that's not a farm. Yeah, that's different, isn't
Yeah.
it?
So that
That's
that but
I mean,
it's a open air. Is it an open air market that happens to have a lot more hours than the farmers market? That I would love to just understand what are the bounds created by the state, and where can we move around in
Sure.
those?
Yeah.
And also, I think the other thing I would say is where are the bounds created by the state, and what do we want them to be? Because if it becomes a a lovely mini mart, that's different than if it's a farm stand. And so how do you define that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so we can, I can expand your understanding of
you.
what a qualifying product is,
Yeah.
how you comply with the RAPs, et cetera. Sure.
And if
No problem.
you
Happy to
just
do
need
that.
to point us at existing
Mhm.
state pages or something, we can dig a little
Yep.
bit. Jeff?
Yep.
Yeah, I think my comments probably largely reflect what Mary was saying. I'm uncomfortable with basically all of this language except for the reference to 24 VSA 44 yada yada for the AOFB, for similar reasons that Mary noted, and I think we need to dig in this a lot deeper. So, in theory, someone on Route 5 South is looking at a 7,000 square foot building and 250 parking spaces. That's a giant project. I just want to make sure that we understand that we're not going to open up all of our lands to such giant projects. I'm not saying that a giant project like that doesn't make sense on Route 5 South, but our regs don't accommodate that, and I don't think the state law requires us to accommodate that.
Yeah. So I guess to help us out, it would be good to separate out. Let's get the definitions where we want them, so that we're talking about some defined objects, and that we have the whole spread covered. So we have these three proposed. Are those sufficient? And then can we get the definition so we know, oh, this is Sweetland, this is the farmer's market, this is hogwash, and here's one that we just can imagine, where does it fit? So let's get our definitions right so that we can have handles on things. Then we will layer on top the which districts they go where, and the policy piece of this.
Yep.
Jeff Lubell?
Yeah, Jeff Lubell. I'm a resident of Norwich. And I'm speaking in my individual capacity, notwithstanding the fact that I am also the chair of the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. So I am very supportive overall of this direction. I'm, certainly there could be some wordsmithing, and I think it would be useful to hear from the existing accessory on-farm businesses in town, and to hear from any existing open air markets in town about what they think of these definitions, just to make sure we haven't missed anything. But the concept of really, just rationalizing our treatment of farm businesses and farm products, I think it's really useful. It's certainly within the character of Norwich to support agriculture, to support farmers markets to support, farm stands and other things. I mean, I think that's very much in the character of Norwich. At the same time, I do agree with Jeff that we need to make sure that our regulatory construct is sufficient to be able to distinguish between someone who's proposing something on Route 5 South and someone who's proposing something, 5 miles out of the middle of town on a dirt road, right? And so we do have, there is a site plan, there is the conditional review process. So it does have things there about infrastructure and parking, and it may be that it's adequate. I just think someone should take a look at it to make sure that whatever door we're opening up with considers fully the infrastructure context, make sure there's adequate parking, make sure there's adequate road access, right? Make sure there's, adequate emergency access, right? All those kinds of things. We need to make sure that, and it may be that we do. I'm not haven't studied carefully the provisions regarding conditional use and yeah, I guess there's one other site plan review, right? But I would say this, I do think we should take a careful look in particular at provision 5.03D4, which is the conditional use for rural residential, and as to whether or not it makes sense to apply that to open air markets. And so, for example, the requirement that you can't build it on prime ag soil. Like, I feel like if here we're talking about an agricultural product, why not have that, in a farming area? Or, it may be that the buildings that are created with an open air market don't look exactly like the other buildings, right? And so are they going to say, well, it's not within the character of this district? I just think that that's one in particular. So I guess what I would do is be supportive of really taking a careful look and being thoughtful about, do we have the right regulatory construct to adequately regulate these things, but not overly constrict them? And that requires, I would say, looking particularly at 503D4, but also the points that Jeff was making about adequacy, the infrastructure, and making sure that we're not just opening us up to building anything anywhere, in our rural areas.
Yeah, I mean, the idea for open air markets is to make them a conditional use, which there is, quite rigorous standards that, an applicant has to comply with in order to, get DRB approval. In terms of the specific district standards that you're referring to, I absolutely think we should take a look at those. Especially in terms of rural residential, which represents over 80% of the land area, if not more, in the town of Norwich. And the way it's written right now, I don't think captures entirely the the variety and character that area has. So I think that specific district standard should be reviewed.
Help me out. So you're talking about the district standard for rural residential, or when you Jeff talked about 503, I see 503 at the end of the first statement about open air markets. Can you help me out a little bit?
I think we're talking about the same thing, Jan. 503D4 is the district standard within 5.03 for rural residential, and I'm not questioning it for broader uses. I just think that we should think about for any particular conditional use whether it makes sense. I haven't gone through and looked at other conditional uses. I'm just looking at this one and saying, if someone builds a structure that looks like a farmer's market and there are no existing farmer's markets, are they going to get rejected because it's not like every other, standard, right, building? Or if they build it on prime ag soil, is it going to get rejected because, here we are of an agricultural business in an agricultural place that makes sense to me, but like, it's not 503D4 wasn't written with that in mind. So I just think that for particular conditional uses, you should just make sure that those standards make sense. If they do, great, but if not, we should just take a fresh look at them and make sure that, you could always exempt that particular provision from for a particular use.
Mm-hmm. Jeff Goodrich?
Yeah, I appreciate what Jeff Lubell said. I mean, I'm going to go two ends of the spectrum. One is you know, if you're going to sell corn and pumpkins out of your front yard, I don't think we need conditional use review for that. That's an open air market. And I don't care where you sell it in town. So I think we need to be clear about that. You know, as a supporter of Sweetland Farms, I think, you know, there's enormous controversy going on in Heartland right now with respect to something like Sweetland Farms that is not contemplated in zoning or the town plan in Heartland. I'm not going to weigh in. I'm not going to offer an opinion about where that should be. You know, as much as I appreciate Sweetland Farms, for instance, you know, we've got a retail use in a broader context. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that, but I think our zoning ordinance, our zoning and our regulations don't contemplate what's currently happening, and I think we need to codify accordingly.
Mhm.
That's exactly right.
Yeah, and I think that's to my point about definitions. Let's get a good set of definitions that cover the whole range, and it may be 3 of them, it may be 4 of them, that we can then say, all right, this on the topic of agricultural related uses, here are definitions. Get those names so we can talk about it, and then look at these district standards and so forth, because we have quite a few of them and they do stretch the range right now. And we need a good solid base to start from. Mary?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just,
The other,
sorry, Mary, go ahead.
go ahead. No, go ahead, Stephen, if you had something to respond there.
I was just going to ask the group if there were, you know, similar uses beyond the 3 that we've identified here that we should look at under the same topic.
Okay.
So we
I don't-
should, I mean, and that's my point about making sure that we have the right definitions to start with, and that they separate out things correctly, so that, because it may be that you can have open air markets, you know, to Jeff's distinction on parking around industrial uses. Do you have offices or do you have a warehouse? Do you separate out your open air market by size, or by square footage, by traffic, by, do we have the delineations right? And there may need to be more categories in our definitions to be able to have handles on the correct things.
Yeah. I wanted to just at least highlight some questions on the point number 2 here around educational, recreational, or social events at these geographies, because it's very broad. And again, like, supportive of having things like this, but if you look at it, you know, you can have farm stays for social purposes. So, I mean, if I live next to a farm, does that mean that farm can become a wedding venue? Does that mean it can be a venue where people are staying overnight many, many times, and they're outdoor events, this kind of activity? So I think that as you start to look at this, and, you know, with this lens of how might this get implemented, you can imagine, oh, nice, you're going to stay over with a little kid and learn about farming and go away the next day. Or you can imagine something else. And so I think it's kind of our job, you know, tastings and meals. You know, then you start thinking, is this going to become a restaurant? Like, you know, again, you think about the kind of what's happened out at Sweetland Farms. The little farm store becomes a convenience store. You know, questions, is that right? Is this going to, like, how does that go? You know, they have food trucks there on Friday nights and things like that. So if you're a neighbor there, how do you feel about having, you know, a bunch of food trucks pulling in and you know, different at Dan and Witt's than if it's in your rural residential area? So I think there are a number of questions that just at least just kind of pull that apart a little bit more and make sure it's what we intend.
Yeah, I hear that. I hear that.
Okay.
So I think, yeah, well, I mean, I'll do a primer on what qualifies, you know, a use in this, you know, under this idea, under this legislation.
Yeah. And what I want to do personally, and I think it'd be a good exercise for us to do is um, think about it from the point of view of impacts. What do we need to have in our definitions that get at the impact? So the point, oh yeah, at late hours of the night, there may be a food truck there, or 10 food trucks. Is it
Yeah,
number of food trucks? Is it hours? Is it traffic? Is it, what are the things that matter? Let's make sure they're captured and delineated in definitions, and then we can talk about districts and allowed uses. Because to my mind, I can look and say, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. And then you kind of exercise your imagination and stretch it one way and another, and it starts to sound, problematic for the neighbors.
yeah,
And we need to use our imagination in that way.
yeah,
Jeff,
I
Jeff
absolutely
Lubell?
agree.
Yeah, this sounds like a great discussion and a great set of next steps. And obviously, it's your committee. You should do what makes sense. I did want to offer a suggestion for your consideration, which might be to invite to the next meeting when you're talking about this, any businesses that qualify or appear to qualify or want to qualify, so that to the extent that you have specific questions about, well, what does this really mean, or how does this work, or is this definite, that you're getting some input from the people who are affected, by it, so that I just think we would have a more informed conversation, right, if we had specific questions. So that's something to think about.
Yeah. My only thought there is that, all of these people are operating, in existence right now. They might perceive that as, that we're trying to regulate them in the past. So, yeah, I mean, I think
I would
it's,
certainly, I'm very happy to get input from the people that are going to be affected by it. I just would want the timing to be right, to be useful for our conversation. I don't want a room full of people prematurely worrying about something when we haven't thought through it or done anything concrete yet. So let's get the timing right for that discussion.
yeah,
Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate what Jeff Lubell said. However, as one who understands the regulatory process, zoning violations, et cetera, hypothetically, the apartment building down at Route 5 and River Road, they're paving, they're adding spaces and so forth, none of which complies with the regulations. So there's a zoning violation. Regardless of who's staff at the time, nothing said. Down the road a little bit, L&M's got a contractor's yard and they're spilling stuff into the street as their trucks go out, and the zoning administrator at the time issued a violation. So, here's my dilemma. It'd be great as a avid supporter of Sweetland Farms. I believe they're in violation of our zoning ordinance. And I don't want to put Sweetland Farms or any other entity in a place where Steve has to go out there and says, cease and desist. So, the sensitivity that you offered, Jan, I think relates to, hey, cow manure has been happening in this town. How do we move forward in a collegial manner and get input that supports what we're trying to do? I'd hate to throw Steve in a position like that, or the town, or the the operators in that position. So this is really awkward, and I want to be clear that I don't want to raise the awkward bar any further.
I hear you.
Agreed.
I understand those points. I guess I would just suggest that we should find a way somehow to make sure before we finalize a definition that, what if we could fix it? What if something that is not in accordance, we could create a definition that makes it, make sense? Then why not get that input before we come up with a definition? Then they're like, oh, sorry, I wish you had asked me,
Right. So I
all.
guess I would ask Vince for in round one in terms of minutes and making the public aware of what we're talking about, and then we can put things in the packet that also help the conversation. but make it clear in the public record that we are at this early stage of getting much better, more accurate, and well delineated definitions. We understand this is an important topic that needs a holistic view, and we're asking for appropriate input, and we'll have ongoing conversation. Just somehow that flags the stage we're at, our openness to comment, and then that the definitions that are in the packet now, which will be updated in the next packet, are a work in progress. Please help us, get them right, and really get that message out. Mary? Muted.
I know. Jeff was first, I think.
Okay, Jeff?
Yeah, so Vince, please don't put in the minutes that I think Sweetland Farms is in violation of our zoning ordinance.
No, it's on the video, but
Yeah, that's
It's-
fine. It's
in a
not,
minute.
It's
I-
too, you can't
it's
scrub
not
the
my,
internet.
rather, look, I love Sweetland Farms. So what I would like to do in the context of that is say, okay, what do they do? How do I fill out the definition accordingly? And I think that's what you were asking on. I think we can do that based on our knowledge of these facilities.
Yeah, I think we can use so it is an existing, we may have one that is existing. We want a definition that includes it. And then we ask the question, is this acceptable as it stands? Okay, do we have that in our rules? And then how might this stretch one way or the other? And what would the boundaries be of it stretch too far? And we don't want to allow that. It's that kind of exercise.
Yeah.
It's important to note that Act 143, I'm sorry, Mary, go ahead.
So, look, I agree, but I agree with Jeff Bubell. I think it would be good to get people to, to be part of the conversation. And I don't think that, I think, inviting people early, and everyone's obviously invited to it. I would also say too, that let's invite neighbors as well and make sure that they get invited. Because I do think that as you think about, a Sweetland Farm type of store, if that becomes a norm and that becomes okay there, then is it okay in 4 other spots in town? And so, while it's, charming and lovely, and I love it too, I would hate to see, I don't know if Norwich Creamery turned that way, how everybody would feel, or some of the other spots in town. So, I think we do have an issue here, and let's talk about it. Let's talk about it rather than trying to talk about it, maybe work around it, maybe ask things to be pushed back or pulled back, and, and get into alignment better so that it becomes a model for a great, something that we'd like to see in the town.
Yeah. I mentioned this when I was talking to Stephen about this earlier. It's an interesting point. If you look at Norwich in a regional context on just this topic, and you say rural, it's a rural, compared to Hanover, Lebanon, Hartford, Norwich has, as Stephen said, a whole lot of rural residential, but we have a rural feel, and we have a disproportionate number of various agricultural things like this. So, and if you look forward in time, if the population of the Upper Valley grows and various things, pressures come, we want to have this work in Norwich. We want to have the fact that many thousands of people drive from outside the area or the periphery of the area to the core towns, and they'll say, oh, it's great, I get to go to this farmer stand on the way home, and it's right here in Norwich. There's a regional consideration to this whole thing that puts a certain pressure and market into this with Norwich at the center of it. And so we should be careful and we should be mindful of doing this right.
And you know, these uses sort of straddle the line between, you know, standard agricultural practices, which we can't regulate, and, you know, normal commercial uses, which we can regulate. So there are important qualifications to to even initially qualify as an accessory on-farm business that, you know, I'll pull out for you guys to
Yeah.
understand. But we do have a lot of this use, and I think our bylaws need to recognize that, and as Jeff said, Goodrich said, codify it.
Okay, good. So I think that's a pithy one to keep on an agenda for a
Yep.
couple of meetings to come. I would like to touch on the conditional use one certainly tonight, just because I think it gets at this topic of DRB flexibility. This is specifically the one that Ernie flagged to say if we're going to give them flexibility, we need to give them guidance. But it's that added 501 section C there, which is giving the DRB substantial flexibility. How do people feel about that, and how do we make that work? Jeff?
Yeah, you know, so the question to me is stuff like, you know, if it's a temporary, you know, thing, and I threw my packet on the floor. So if it's a temporary setting where you sell pumpkins and corn, whatever, that's different from if it's a permanent structure. So I'm not saying this is what I want to propose, but to the extent you propose a permanent structure, that could be a threshold criterion for conditional use review. It could be, you know, the size of that permanent structure. It could be more than 3 spaces. You know, it could be myriad things. But I think if there are threshold criteria, it's stuff like that.
So Jeff, is that specific to the other uses in section 501 conditional use, or the preamble portion where we call out the fact that if an applicant has a use that they'd like to propose that doesn't currently exist explicitly in our list of conditional uses for a district, that they have the opportunity to propose that, and the DRB has an opportunity to review that, even if it's not on the list, so to speak.
I mean, I hope, Jan, you're okay with me this back and forth here.
No, that's fine.
To me, that would be a variance, Steve. I mean, so unless we can somehow say these are the possible uses that the DRB might embrace, it's a variance.
I'd like to push back on that. First of all, a variance is a use that exists outside of the current zoning regulation, that it cannot be accommodated, and it's a very, very highly specific set of criteria as mandated by the state. Waivers are typically used and, you know, have been sort of enacted in legislation since 2005 to give DRBs, zoning boards of adjustment, some discretion to waive dimensional standards. What this allows is an opportunity for a DRB to consider a use that is similar to, but not specifically on the list of conditional uses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And
frankly,
the variance criteria in that case doesn't really apply.
yeah, I don't agree. I mean, if it's not in the permitted use list or the conditional use list, it's a variance. And you know, I've seen enough. I've actually been an expert witness in enough of these cases that, look, if there's some broad definition we can incorporate, let's think about that. How do we do that? And I'm all in favor of giving the DRB flexibility and supporting the notion of waivers.
Okay.
Can we just start with intent here for a minute and then get specific? So do people agree with the intent of giving the DRB flexibility, or at what level, how do we see the DRB's role in terms of flexibility to judge? We've definitely got feedback that they want guidance, they want rules and criteria that they can look at to say, okay, this is how I'm supposed to pass or fail this application. But how do we see the overall topic of DRB discretion as an intent of this group? Jeff?
You know, just
Yeah,
Just
I
to
don't,
be-
I don't, I don't
Jeff
want
and
to
Steve.
sorry, I
Go
don't want
ahead,
to
Jeff.
put words in Steve's mouth. I think that, you know, Ernie, my dear friend, and I have disagreed about the notion of waivers in the past. I think waivers should be a key tool to what the DRB does. So, you know, an applicant comes forward, staff looks at it, you know, the draconian stream setbacks and fluvial stuff, none of which I think is really based in science. And I'm trying to be polite. So to me, the DRB ought to be able to say, what's the standard? What are we striving for? And you know, how might we accommodate the proposal if it makes sense by virtue of waivers, as informed by, you know, staff and more.
How about let's look at an example, right? So right now we've got a non-permitted use in town. It's a landscaping business that's behind the Aubuchon Hardware, Frogs or Froggies or whatever. I don't know the name of it, but there's a landscaping business back there. It's beyond the statute of limitations. I can't find them in violation. I would like to bring them into compliance. However, how do we do that? Because we do not have a definition for a contractor's yard in our land use regulations, in our ordinance. So right now, that's prohibited. I can't bring an application forward that mirrors the use. However, it's a well-understood use. You mentioned, you talked about it earlier. To bring them into compliance, we'd have to do a conditional use review. Right now, the DRB doesn't have the authority to review anything that's not explicit on the list. It's not a use that requires a variance in the technical term, nor does it require waivers. It requires review. Simple conditional use review. And without the ability explicitly for the DRB to say, hey, you know, we can consider this, it's prohibited. So this piece, and it's common in a lot of other ordinances across the state, to allow some discretion for the DRB to consider, you know, consider a use that's not on the list.
Yeah.
And I think that's a good authority. And you know, given, you know, adequate training and, you know, attention to the review standards in our conditional use process, you know, a DRB should have the ability to, you know, review for similarity and determine that there's no undue adverse effects to the district, to the town, to the adjoining neighbors from this use, and that it could simply fit into our current review process. But
Yeah.
without that authority, I don't know how to do it.
Yeah, Steve, I think that's a good example. And for the record, the landowner is a client. So I will not be advocating for that. But I do think that Jim LaMontagne's landscape, you know, he's planting trees, the whole 9 yards, however you define it, contractor's yard or otherwise. I think you're right, Steve. It's in conflict with our zoning ordinance. That's at the core of like Sweetland Farms. how do we want to look at it? How do we codify these things going forward? And I agree with you completely. It's been there so long that even if you wanted to cite a violation, so what? It's not going to happen. But that's a good example, like Sweetland Farms, of something that does not reflect what our ordinance allows.
So
Yeah,
is it valid to the delineation or the options that we're talking about? One is to make sure your definitions include what you want to talk about, and then just update all your conditional uses in all your districts, and make sure that whatever you might want to allow in that district is on the list of at least conditional. That's one option. And then another option, or at least to get the edges fuzzy, is to do that, but then at some point allow the DRB discretion that works. And if
Yeah,
if
yeah,
you
we
have a
should do that.
definition and a definition and it's conditional, they're using discretion to make sure it fits, it gets a conditional use. But if that is not defined as a conditional use, what options do you have for discretion?
We should do that every year. I mean, I look at municipalities like Hanover and Lebanon. Every single year, the planning staff among, the boards, they say, we didn't think of that. We didn't think of that. Steve's going to say this all the time. We didn't think of that. Yes.
Basically
we're a very different
updating
municipality.
uses by district. You're saying, let's see what needs to be, what's changed. I mean, I do think if you just did go back to the ag one and say, all right, we had our imaginations jogged by what's happened over the past couple of years, and we want to revisit our conditional uses in these various districts. Let's have that conversation and do it. And if we don't wait 8 years, 10 years, 20 years to do it, it may not feel so monumental. Okay. I think let's park that. I think these are all we're chipping away at it, and I think that this is very good conversation and good progress tonight. And I think it'll take us a couple more. This is like an icebreaker. We smash forward a certain amount, and then we run out of steam. We'll back up, get another head of steam, do that 3 or 4 times, and we'll have a packet of things that are really a good step. And maybe just to jump to the next agenda item, just so that we know where we're going. And I think we've talked about this. So basically, once we get a packet that we want, that are a proposed set of zoning regulation changes, then we have those as a rough edit. Then we will do a final edit, and we will put it out into a public hearing process, a planning commission public hearing process. We will get, and that goes to the regional commission. Stephen, bless him, has to write a report about how it relates to the town plan and state law and all that. And then we have a public hearing. We take comment. We incorporate comments into updating anything that we are proposing. And then that goes to the select board as a very neat, tidy, fully defined package. They have their input. They have a public hearing, and they're the ones that approve. So that's the pipeline that we're preparing for. And Stephen put in the statutes that relate to that, but we've talked about it enough. I think that people have the right expectation. But I think the point I'd like to make is, and actually it was my my failing in the sense that I said before, hey, let's go back and forth with the select board more sooner. And I think really what we need to do as a planning commission is do our job, which is really get the input, think through these things, And we, by the time it comes to the select board from us, it's very well defined. It's got public comment. It's had a lot of thoughtful conversation, and we're giving them something finished for their review. That's really an update to my thinking, which I think is helpful. Okay. Can we move to the minutes? I had a couple comments on the minutes.
Just,
I need to
Just
move.
a couple of things before we move off the topic. First, if anyone has any questions or comments on any of these documents or want further background other than what we've talked about already, in particular in relation to conditional use, please send that to me. There is another piece that hasn't come forward yet. I had reached out to Two Rivers to ask them to do a technical review of our current bylaws, which they have gratefully done and sent back to me. Essentially, their review is entirely technical. Missing references, incorrect references. I'll collate those into a single document and distribute them to the planning commission. But like the sort of duplexing idea, it makes most sense to me to just sort of wrap those into the final edit. If that makes sense.
If it's at the level of purely technical, then that seems valid. Jeff?
Sorry, double click. Yeah, I'd like to see anything Two Rivers submits. I would like to see distributed to the planning commission so we see it firsthand.
Yeah.
Just, yeah, you can put it in a packet, and if some of us will skim it and say it's technical, I'll let Steve incorporate it, and some will read it more carefully. Okay. Can I get a motion to approve minutes on December 10?
Motion approved minutes.
All right.
Second.
Any comments, Mary?
Yep. There's a word missing in the last non-italicized paragraph of number 7. It should say the town plan has not had the anticipated solar development. It's missing the word "had" in it.
I stuck the word. I suggested the word created, had not created the anticipated.
Either way,
Something like
either
that.
way, yeah.
Missing the word.
But that verb is missing. So that was the only thing that I noted.
I saw that.
Okay.
The other one I had, Vince, on number 4, the first sentence was it was 2 separate. And why am I looking at that? Let's see. Interesting. The one in the packet looks slightly different than the one I have in mind. But anyway, on that first sentence of number 4, I think it's not really a first do the zoning regulations and then work on the town plan. We have 2 parallel tracks going on. We
Okay.
have solar siting edits to the town plan that are periodically coming back to this group and are being worked by the working group. And then we have the zoning regs conversation we just had. So it's not sort of first this, then this. It's 2 parallel things.
Okay, I can clarify that.
That's all. Any other comments or edits on the minutes? All right, call the question. All those in favor of approving the minutes, December 10th. Amended? Aye. All right, unanimous. Do we have public comment at the tail end of the meeting here? Okay. thank you all. I'll take a motion to adjourn if we are, someone will throw that on the table.
So moved.
Second,
All those in favor, adjourn.
I.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Stay warm and please don't get sick. Or get better if you are.